The Scientific Advisory Board convened and they were waiting for the meeting to start. And according to Mr. Callahan, before the president even came in, somebody from the CIA came in and snatched everything up and said this never happened and walked out.
The history of UFOs in the United States is it's filled with one impossible sighting after another impossible sighting. The problem with them is that they have great military documentation again and again showing that they actually happened. Or what does one make of the boomerang craft that were seen in just north of New York City in the early 1980s in what's called the Hudson Valley? For several years, you have again and again these enormous objects being seen by thousands of witnesses. They're driving along the highway and they see this object hovering. They get out of their car, their jaws drop open, and this intense bright light shoots down onto the highway like out of a movie. Except this wasn't a movie. This happened many times over a period of, say, 5 years, just north of New York City.
In Great Britain, periods of extensive UFO activity kept the subject warm in the news media. A serving police detective within the UK force in England has over the recent years gathered reports involving over 800 police officers having different UFO encounters. And here is one of the stories.
His name was Police Constable Eric Raymond, and he was a police officer in the Thames Valley Police at the time of this particular sighting. And he was in a rural location in 1979, I believe it was, and he was stood talking with two other police officers, two vehicles parked up middle of the countryside, dark, no street lights or anything, it's just very dark. And they're doing what police officers do at 3 in the morning, have a chat, have a cigarette or whatever. Suddenly in the distance they see bright light blink on for literally a second. It's a long way off, they look, it blinks off, they don't think anything to it. They just carry on talking. 5 minutes later, this happens. And the object appears in front of them at a distance of about 400 metres, at an altitude of just 500 feet, which is very close. And they describe the object as being the size of a football field. And it is shining a beam down the width of a football field across the landscape and slowly scanning the terrain. They think about going on the police radio and think, nobody's going to believe this. So they don't want the ridicule factor. So they watch for 5 minutes in all. The object is moving in total silence, and they say there are smaller objects flying silently around the larger silent object. And after 5 minutes, it goes. It doesn't go up, doesn't go left, doesn't go right. It disappears like a light bulb.
The 70s brought an amazing number of UFO reports from the British Isles. But nothing could compare to what was to unfold in late December 1980 at a NATO base in Suffolk, east of London.
The Rendlesham Forest incident is Britain's most famous and compelling UFO encounter. The file on the incident was made public a number of years ago under the Freedom of Information Act, and so the case file's in the public domain, but the bottom line is the case has never been explained.
Peter Robbins spent 9 years doing intensive research for his book, giving a first-hand account of the case. His co-author, Larry Warren, was airman at the base at the time and one of the key eyewitnesses to the event.
It occurred between Christmas and New Year's on 3 consecutive nights, 1980, and it involved overflights above this twin NATO base complex in Suffolk, about 80 miles from London, landings, the shooting down of beams of light into the weapons storage area, which was a nuclear weapons storage area, very much in violation of our treaty with Great Britain at the time. And on the final night of the 3 nights, there was the biggest incident. In this, my co-author, dozens of other American Air Force personnel were taken and brought out to a field near their sister base, RAF Woodbridge, where they saw the appearance of a machine of undetermined origin.
At that place, an object appeared on the ground in the place of a mist. I saw this happen. A red light moved in, exploded. It caused retina and eye damage to a lot of us peripheral people. A structured object was in its place on the ground. Though you couldn't look directly at it, you'd have to look at it with your peripheral vision to get the shape. Entities were seen. How many? 3. Looking very translucent, not your what they call gray, all that sort of thing. It was almost ghost-like. Very much animated, self-animated though. That whole event was filmed.
Did they walk out of the craft?
They didn't.
Did they
well,
just
no.
appear?
They were floating about a foot above the ground in a very bright light. The lower extremities were very hard to see. They were a foot off the ground.
They were about 4 feet tall. They had that same large cranial structure, the giant black sweeping eyes, almost no nose, a hint of a mouth. And they were each dressed in a suit, very tight-fitting. And they were slightly translucent, and they were floating. So they got in about 5 feet from the thing. They were right there. And the beings were no further away than like 20 feet or so from Larry. So this was all happening in extremely close proximity, very close up. Larry and other men there observed, besides the dozens of American enlisted Air Force personnel, many of them like Larry with secret clearances because they worked around nuclear weapons. But there were British police officers on location. They were from the nearby village of Woodbridge. And while the American Air Force personnel were filming this with video, and this is 1980, so you could spot a video camera a long ways away. It was very bulky, but also regular film cameras. One of these police officers was taking photographs of this landed machine with a 35mm camera. And from what I understand, the Air Force confiscated this camera from the police officer, which caused a bit of a fight. When these beings appeared, they looked at the human beings, and the human beings looked at them. And no hands were shaken, no things were exchanged. If anybody heard voices in their heads, I don't know about this. And at a certain point, these beings, they did not open a door and walk in, but they disappeared. And the sense was they had gone back in. The machine then lifted up. It was making a slight humming sound, my best description. It angled slightly and then, and it was a star, in a matter of seconds, and it was gone. What happened the next day is almost more upsetting to me, namely that these men were debriefed. I think they were told a combination of truths and lies to overwhelm them, intimidate them, keep them quiet. And then that night, a number of the individuals, Larry and Adrian Bustinza next to him included, were taken against their wills, subdued chemically, and put through a series of procedures to confuse and upfuse their thinking, and were released a day or so later, right before New Year's.
3 years later, this incredible story had leaked to the media and created a long succession of headlines as more and more information was revealed from different sources, Larry himself being one of the main sources. But no official comments on the UFO incident were given from either the US or the British government. All the unique film and video material, including the pictures taken by the British policemen, were removed from the base by the US military, never to be seen again. In 2009, Larry King and CNN shed new light on the case by bringing in new eyewitnesses confirming the story of the first night of the sightings.
I was there on the first night. I went off base to check out a possible aircraft downing. I thought it was an aircraft crash, and I took my team with me, and when we got to the wooded line off the East Gate, we discovered a craft of unknown origin. It was triangular in shape.
On the ground?
On the ground.
Did you touch it?
Touched it, walked around it, photographed it. We did a full investigation of it on the ground for 45 minutes.
With this exceptional testimony from a retired U.S. Air Force security officer live on CNN, confirming the story of several other eyewitnesses, you might expect it to lead to some kind of official reaction. Does the Rendlesham case actually tell us straight out that there is another reality in the midst of our lives, able to come and go as it pleases? In other countries, UFO observations were made continuously. In Brazil and the huge Amazon area, UFO and ETs were observed almost on a daily basis.
You know, historically, Brazil is one of the major countries as far as UFO sightings and contacts with aliens is concerned. Now, we have all sorts of cases, and they are spread all over the country. Now, some of the most astounding cases in the UFO history happened in Brazil. We're talking about landings, we're talking about face-to-face contact with aliens, which are getting rare for some reason. And we're talking about also sightings with multiple witnesses. Sightings in the middle of the cities, like 2,000 or 3,000 people seeing a UFO.
But what about Russia and the former Soviet Union?
Russian Navy has not been known to reveal its secrets, but Russian Navy has been known to be in the forefront of the UFO and USO research. And we have reports coming basically from all corners of the world, be it the South Georgia island or the Barents Sea, or for example, especially the Sea of Okhotsk and such lakes like the Lake Baikal. They had encountered not only gigantic underwater objects and submarines who could move at incredible speeds, and the Soviets just could not catch up with them. They had also encountered discs that would basically fly out from under the water, go into the sky, separate into different objects, come back together, fly away. They had encountered a phenomenon which was called kvakery, from the Russian word kvakать, meaning to emit a sound like frogs would do. What it meant is that Soviet submarines, especially in the Atlantic area, would find gigantic moving objects at great depths of the sea. Objects that would emit certain sounds that kind of reminded them of croaking, but they were different sounds. They could do nothing about this, but the Soviets became very nervous because these gigantic objects would accompany them. And of course, they thought the Americans came up with a new way to track Soviet submarines. They found out this was not so. And I want to bring your attention to the country I was born in, Ukraine, 1986 Chernobyl phenomenon. Well, I should not call it that, Chernobyl tragedy. What happened is that according to a number of witnesses, when the explosion took place, a UFO, a sphere, a fiery sphere, had been sighted in the area, and it sent a ray of light, of something, towards the area of the explosion to diminish the effects of the nuclear explosion itself.
In 2008, we received over 867 sighting reports from 37 different cities in Turkey. And out of those, 35% of them were documented. And 20%, 15 to 20% of them were unidentified.
In Turkey, one of the most amazing recent cases is from the town Comburgos, an hour away from Istanbul, where a security guard captured astonishing UFO footage over a 3-month period in 2007.